the December regular meeting of the Planning and Zoning Board to order. Roll call, Vicki Myers here, Tracy.
Here.
Bob Hunter is ill. Mark.
Here.
Greg.
Here.
Pete.
Here.
And Woody. And Woody had told me that he wasn't gonna be able to be here, so he would be excused as well. Public comments on agenda items. Do we have any public comments? Nope, okay. Approval of minutes of the November 27th regular meeting. Did anyone have any changes? I'd entertain a motion if everybody's good with it.
I move minutes approved as submitted.
Second.
Okay, any
Vicki, you
discussion?
probably need to officially appoint Pete.
Yep, okay. Pete, you're voting today.
Okay.
You got that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Any opposed to the minutes being approved? Okay, the minutes carry unanimously. They're approved as written. Okay, discussion and possible action on the proposed water tower. Shane Leopard from Right Angle Engineering, and we have a representative from Tri-Beach Fire Department. Okay. Can you guys each introduce yourself and your background, or before we get started on the questions? I assume you all got the questions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep. Shane Lippard with Right Angle Engineering. I don't know if I need to move this or.
Probably.
Right Angle Engineering, we began working with the town maybe 2008. Back then, we've been around, I guess the lower part of North Carolina for 30-some years. Our president, Jim, is the chief of engineering at the Corps of Engineers from way back. I've been with him for 20 years. And we've worked on a lot of municipal projects in our region. We don't go all over the place, we stay here, helping out a lot of local folks. So we were asked to look at the need for an additional water tower. There's been, I think, some events over the past few years that have maybe raised some questions about having available fire flow. If we've got a tower, is there enough tower? How do we look, in the regards to that? So, our initial preliminary engineering scope was looking at, the addition of a second water tower on the west end of the island. And in doing that, there's two really main numbers that have to be considered in your water supply. And they're two separate issues, totally. You have the Division of Water Quality requirement that you have to provide storage for half of your average annual daily amount. And that's for a year. So, the community here is a beach community, obviously. You have a lot of tourists in the summer. You don't have a lot of tourists in the winter. So there's this variable requirement for demand on just the demand and storage requirements for DEQ. So in the summertime, in your 3 peak months, you're operating probably in, I have a number here somewhere, but you're around 750,000 gallons a day average in the summer during your tourist periods. In the winter, you're at 100, 150 average. So, there's a big disparity in those numbers, which creates an interesting situation for you all. Because in the wintertime, you don't need a lot of water. You don't want to store a lot of water. That's an operational issue. But when you're looking at, the requirements for the state DEQ, those numbers are an annual. So you're compliant. You're sufficiently compliant with the state. They only look at your local water supply report, how much water you used, how many metered connections you have. I know there's some discussion about your projections of how many people, but your local water supply plan has 3,050 metered connections. That's not houses, that's not people, that doesn't care if it's irrigation or domestic, it's connections to the water supply. And they look at the total amount of usage. At the end of that year, divided by 365, that's your average annual, which, for you all, I I think your average is putting you at 475, somewhere in there. So, you know, when you take half of that, you're compliant on that respect. So, so that's where, you know, that number comes from, you know, from a state standpoint. And then the other flow issue that the chief hopefully might shed a little bit of light on is fire flow requirements. And the fire flow requirements, there's several different numbers depending on where you look. Brunswick County has a standard for everything that's in Brunswick County off the island. I don't think the town has a standard other than, you know, what is dictated by the chief and the fire marshal, which is developed based on, you know, building size, building use, and those types of things that address, you know, that flow for fire hydrants based on, you know, how much use you would need on a given structure. In the report that we developed, we used the number 2,050 gallons per minute for a 2-hour duration is what a fire flow capacity limit that we would be looking at on the west end of the island. So when you couple that with, you know, projections of, you know, and I know our numbers are not looking strictly at buildable lots, but what we look at is, you know, we looked at the 7 years past as like a linear regression, project that into the future, lots, flow, looked at the rest of Brunswick County, you know, projections. So we project out, which, you know, it's a planning projection, you know, so you have to take that into account. But you add that to the chief's fire flow requirement, and you get to where you need 475,000 gallons, I think. But anyway, I can give you the exact number. But it gets you to where, you know, to provide those numbers and to meet those things, you would be looking at additional storage requirements. In our report, we didn't look at, you know, you have connections from the county, you have water supply from the county, there's various flows out in the county that, you know, that they govern. And in the wintertime, you know, they have enough capacity and pump capacity where they can supply all the water you need in the wintertime based on, and they don't even, I mean, they barely float the tank in the winter, you know, but that, as an operational standpoint, that puts you in a little bit of an issue with, when you do that, don't have any reserve capacity for fire flow. You're probably fine on the domestic usage, but you don't have storage. So if there's a blip in the system from the county, something happens, you don't get flow from them, you don't have that water pressure head in the tower to assist on a fire situation. That's where, you know, those operational parameters, you know, you're not, you know, maybe at the optimum situation. So I don't know if that gives you kind of a basic understanding of the two numbers that are in the report and where we projected that from. But, you know, I don't know if at this point, if you want the chief to talk about the fire flow a little bit too, and then we can get a little deeper into, you know, individual questions if you want.
Is that fine with you guys? Is that how you'd like to attack this? Because I think you got our list of questions, and they were pretty, you know, pretty in-depth, so, sure.
I'm Doug Todd, I'm the fire chief. I had the position since 1989 as the fire chief. I've got right almost 40 years in service in the fire service as a volunteer, and some of it as a part-time paid employee. So that's kind of my background. And just whatever your questions y'all have, I'll try to help you with on it.
Okay. Do you guys want to go through this list? Just go right through it? How would you like to attack that?
That sounds good.
Yep.
Okay. You guys have a copy of it? Yes?
I did, yeah.
Okay.
I forgot my copy of it because I left one meeting and came straight to this meeting. So
Here, I've got an extra copy if you want it.
I apologize for that. In
That's
fact, I
okay.
had to leave the other meeting. So I had to get it.
Okay, first of all, the way this worked was that everyone had a lot of questions. there's a lack of understanding that we need to,
Questions are good.
right,
Um,
I agree.
Because I think that our intent of this is a jumping off point. I don't think, there's lots of questions, there's lots of options, and it's good to get this process to where everybody understands.
Well, we discussed at our last meeting, we collected questions and then gathered those, and then that's what you've got. So this is a collection of questions from various people. So let's just go through this. Were there options other than the new water tower to increase water pressure for fire safety at the west end of Holden Beach?
Well, there's, like I discussed before, we were looking at, initially the tower. I mean, there's potentially, all kind of options, to increase the flow. You could look at, ground storage. You could look at increasing capacity to the feed on the west end. But when you start doing those things, it becomes, a function of what Brunswick County can provide. So once you go off the island, are there more improvements that would have to be done to get to your demand points? So what we looked at is, the elevated storage tank is the most cost-effective to meet your long-term goals. Short-term, you could do some things, but it's dependent on, what the county can provide. On the west end of the island, you have an 8-inch HDP plastic pipe that feeds under the waterway. Well,
Oh, is it 8? I
It's
thought it was
8.
6.
Well, it's an 8-inch nominal HDP pipe is what everybody that I've talked to has on record. I don't know if anybody's been able to verify if it's a 6. To come down to that, I think it's a 6.
You told something, I was told it was 10, so I don't know.
Well,
Yeah, I was told it was 10 too.
I was told it was 10.
Well, the county has an energy system that it's an 8. I don't know if there's a record of 10 somewhere, but that is a nominal HDP directional drill pipe, which the inside diameter is probably more like 7 inches. It's not a full 8-inch diameter on the inside, it's a nominal diameter. But from my discussions with John Nichols at the county, and also as a background information, we've had Jerry Pierce has worked with us to develop this preliminary engineering report. He used to be the director of the entire Brunswick County utilities operations for about a decade. Jerry was instrumental in providing, a lot of, our data to build our preliminary engineering report off of. So Jerry has a lot of inherent knowledge of the county, and it's his understanding, it's John Nichols' understanding that it's an 8. It's a nominal 8, so the diameter is probably 7, inside diameter, if that. But, my point is, there's potentially issues off the island that the county would have to further address. If you just drill a 12-inch pipe under the waterway, that will help, obviously, but it may not get you to, a peak fire flow number.
Okay, what other options other than the new tower were considered, such as ground level storage tank, increased pumps? You reviewed all that and came up with the elevated storage tank? Is that how that worked?
Yeah, and, from a long-term perspective, groundwater storage and pumping puts you into it's an electricity-driven system, so then you need backup generators. They would have to be elevated above, 100-year floodplain that you are running into with your sewer system. So all those type issues, and, from a 20-year perspective, the O&M on a ground storage puts you probably at a point where elevated water storage makes more sense.
Okay. And there was a question, would there be any improvement by replacing the 6-inch pipe at Seagull with a 12-inch pipe? And what I'm hearing you say is that that's actually an 8-inch pipe.
Well, I'd have to get Chris to confirm what's on Seagull. But I believe that the meter is a 6-inch meter.
Okay,
The supply feed, I think, is an 8-inch. The pipe down Seagull might be an 8-inch, but that's not confirmed, which would really take some real physical investigation to get that. On the original, I don't think Seagull Street was on the original 1978 plans. So there, I don't know if Chris has a copy of what went on Seagull Street when they did it, or if it was a county thing that was done, because the county technically has ownership of the feed under the waterway. It becomes Holden Beach's system at the end of Seagull Street at the meter. The meter is the delineation point.
Regardless though, is whether it's 6 or 8, going to a bigger pipe, does that improve flow, I guess is the question, really.
Well, yes. However, it'll improve your flow. Obviously, you got a bigger pipe, but it may still be limited by what Brunswick County can supply on the other side. So just to improve, to put a 12-inch pipe all the way down Seagull Street is gonna obviously reduce the frictional losses for that section. But if on the other side of the waterway, I think right at where it comes onto the mainland, I think that's only an 8-inch. But you go up to Boone's Neck, and I believe it turns into a 12-inch there. But then it's still limited to what supply is coming from the Boone's Neck area. That, I forgot what they call it, it's like the southwest regional supply area. They've got all that delineated in there.
Where is where is the source of water that's driving into that 8-inch pipe? How far away is that?
It's coming all the way from the northwest plant.
Yeah,
In Lee, up on the,
Okay.
across 74, 76.
that's the county's, treatment plant is up in northwest.
So is it the same source that's coming for the source to the,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
so it's a single,
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's single source.
Yeah, now there's various, mains that I think feed that, service area. And there's even the county does have an inline booster pump that's over here, I think on the causeway somewhere,
It's no, the closest
You know where
butcher
it
pump is on 130, about halfway to Charlotte,
halfway to Charlotte.
is the closest butcher pump.
Okay.
The next
And-
closest one is up next to the community college.
And the county is, they have some improvement plans up in the Charlotte area. I think they're increasing like 112-inch to a 24 and some other things, but, Mr. Nichols that I've talked to is, he's like, well, they're probably marginal improvements to your region of the Holden Beach study area. He said there's marginal things, but, so there's, I guess, to simplify, just improving the pipe on your side, may not get you to a full fire flow condition because there's limiting factors on the other side.
do we have issues in pressure as well as reserve water
Well,
capacity?
It's combined. It's not overall pressure. It's just when you look at, the fire hydrant at the end of the west end, there's one 12-inch line that goes from Seagull all the way down there. And when you run that fire hydrant full on, it can only deliver, I think it's around 1,000 gallons per minute, when ideally the chief would like to have 2,000 gallons a minute. So there's only so much that they can boost the pressure on the other side to get that flow all the way down. It's like 8,000 feet, I think, from Seagull.
And so by putting a water tower closer there, does that in and of itself increase the pressure? Okay, because of the proximity
Yeah, and you
of where
have-
that water is dropping.
We had, the surveyor, Chris Stanley, East Coast Engineering, surveyed this tower to verify that what its height was. And it's at 168 feet above sea level to the overflow. That's how much gravity head you have in that tower. So that's 72 PSI roughly in this tower. So if you take a tower and you put it on the west end, well, then you've got 72 PSI available in that tower to potentially feed the hydrant all the way at the end of the road, where, when you're trying to pull 2,000 gallons at one time under the waterway, you lose a lot of available pressure due to friction in that section.
Okay. Regarding section B1, critical needs, and it's the second B1, there's two B1s. It says, is the Is this an NC State requirement, a rule of thumb, et cetera? It's typically elevated storage would have the capacity to provide half of the tank volume dedicated to potable water usage and half available to fire flow. Is that just like a rule of thumb?
Yeah, that's, like I said, there's two numbers that we're looking at, and the
Right.
state only requires you as a minimum to provide their storage. And typically, if you're looking at, providing enough storage for that number, and you're dealing with fire flow, you would like to have, that equal amount, or you would make the tank half full available for the other half of fire flow. So that's where we came up with, you take the fire flow amount, that's 270,000 gallons, and then the storage amount, was 208,000 gallons, so you're at, 478,000 gallons needed.
Yeah. Do we know if other small towns like Ocean Isle Beach or Sunset Beach meet these requirements?
Yeah, they're way ahead of you.
Does that include the new pipe under the waterway that Ocean Isle just did this year, or is in their budget?
I don't know, but I believe Ocean Isle has 2 storage tanks, Oak Island has 3. Sunset Beach doesn't have their own system, it's a county-owned system, I guess they must have partnered with the county, but there's a tower, I think, that is on the opposite side that has about 1 million gallons of storage. Ocean Isle has 1 million gallons of storage. Not sure total what Oak Island has, but it's 3 storage towers there, and Holden Beach has 1 that's 300.
Based upon the right angle report, we've been insufficient with the combined water needs for a very long time, as our current water tower only holds 300,000 gallons. Does this fact impact our homeowners' insurance? Will a second water tower help with our insurance rates?
Well, I guess I don't know if insufficient is the right word, you're compliant, based on the public water supplies requirements. And the chief might could shed some light on the insurance implications. I think it comes down to how your station is rated.
That's correct. And right now, it's kind of left up to the insurance companies. They changed the law a couple years ago, allowing insurance companies, if your house is 4,500 square feet or more, then they can consider your property commercial. And it's kind of left up to the insurance company which way they want to do that.
Okay.
If it's classified as commercial property, then anything below a 6 will help. Right now, we're a 5, correct, right now we're a 4. And anything below a 6 is the cutoff for most residential property. So, and we're well below that as far as insurance purposes. So as far as insurance rate, it's not gonna hurt you.
Okay. I think that was the question.
Does the water flow capacity go into the calculation of
Yes, it
that
does.
rating? Okay.
Well,
But I
so-
think what he's saying is you can't get any better.
40% of our grade comes from the water system. That's where it came from. 50% comes from the fire department. What we do, that we have control over, the water, we have no control over. That falls back on the county and to y'all as far as the water system. The water system outscores the fire department right now.
Okay.
And so we take there's a diversion factor to figure it in there, so they take points away from us because we don't score close together with the fire department. Side of it, the water of it. So, and then 10% of it comes from the communication center, which we have no control over. And that's kind of how the rating is developed. And like I say, right now we're at a 4. And, that's 2 points below where residential property gets a break at. In most cases, like I say, kind of left up to insurance companies now, if the square footage is over 4,500, if they want to consider your property as a commercial property, or if they want to consider it as a residential property, give you insurance rates.
But building another tower would not decrease our insurance rates, right? That's what I'm hearing you say.
It could decrease it, because
What,
anything that you do to make the system better, it could decrease the
I
rate,
think
but
he's
as
saying
far
it
as
though.
helping residential properties get an insurance break, no, it's only gonna help on the commercial side.
It's only
Okay.
gonna help the large houses. Is that what I'm hearing?
If large house, if the insurance companies decide to do that as a commercial rate, then yes, it's gonna help them on larger houses,
But it's not gonna help on anything below,
4,500 square feet,
it's not gonna help at all.
no ma'am. 6 is the best you can do on residential property that's where the cutoff is with the insurance companies giving you a break when your homeowner's insurance is at 6.
Okay.
For most residential property.
So,
We couldn't reach a 6 even if we had unlimited water, I mean,
We're below that.
You're below.
oh,
What if
The rate-
they-
the
they
rate-
to be
the
less.
deadline-
okay, so we're already getting, okay, I'm,
we're the best we can be,
The one-
right?
The 1 is the best you can get.
Okay.
okay.
A 10 is no rating at all. So it kind of works in reverse order for insurance purposes. 1 is the best, a 10 is the worst.
So we're already very good and we have the
How many
best rates we can
properties
have,
roughly do you think we have?
So water tower isn't gonna help.
Square feet?
except
Not as
for
far as-
the
How many
large
properties
houses.
do
For
we have?
insurance purposes, for
Dozen?
residential
Yeah, no,
properties.
we have more than that.
Okay.
The problem is.
Okay,
is
did anybody
that
else have
that's
any
only
questions
within
under the,
insurance company. We
better
can't
understanding the
make it
need
work.
section?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Well, Chief, is there anything on, like, the fire department side that can offset, or do you even need to offset, like, you know, at the very end, we were looking at like 1,000 gallons a minute, but when you calculate the number, it says you need 2,000 gallons. Is there anything on y'all's side that bridges that gap, or is there anything, I mean, or is it gonna increase your ratings by, if you had a pumper truck with bigger volume or something like that, is
As
there-
far as just strictly looking at rating, there's nothing that's gonna help. What's gonna help as far as the water supply is if we do get a big house fire down there and the need of water flow is there, it's gonna help us as far as being able to control that fire. That's where the most important part of it comes in, is how much are you willing to lose? Are we gonna be able to stop it because we have a limited amount of water, we're not gonna be able to stop it? It comes down to the point, the fire has to burn down to the point, if we have enough water to overcome the fire. And if we only have 1,000 gallons per minute on hydrants, and we don't have the available water, then it may be 3 or 4 houses down the road before we get to the point where we can stop it.
Has there been a condition or an instance where
Yeah.
that happened, where the water flow was insufficient and the fire was
About every time
worse?
we have a house fire over here,
Okay,
because most of the time they're early in the morning, and we have more than one burning when we get here.
And it's,
And you can stand on the hose and push it together most of the time.
but don't we empty the tower during the winter? Don't we empty that tower?
Chris was dropping it at a half, but I think after the last couple of fires we had, he kind of backed off of doing that. So we've kind of
But-
helped him keep the water moving by doing some extra flow testing.
But
extra flows on hydrants.
do you know if that helps at the west end though? Is the west end primarily on that single line, Shane, or is the tower tied to it?
No, the tower's tied to it.
The systems are tied completely together, so I mean,
I mean, I
we
didn't know
get
if my
the feed,
question
we get the
is.
feed all the way down.
But it looked like you have the water fire flow that you wanted when you checked at 878. So if you're still having that problem with the water flow that you're requesting, then that's not gonna necessarily alleviate the problem of, according to the report, you actually had that, fire flow at 878 was at 2250, which, and then when you got down to 1365 was where it was only 1250.
Right, well, we're talking about a single house though, that we're looking at the 2250. If you get multiple houses burning, then you got to figure all that into account if you're trying to control the fire with multiple houses burning. We're looking at one house there at 2250.
Yeah, so what I'm getting at is the no water tower wouldn't necessarily help that. Because you already have the capacity that you think you need. And you still have multiple houses that you can't
As far
control.
as insurance purposes, we have the capacity we need to get the best rating y'all can get. As far as fighting fires, we do not. You gotta look at it you're looking at two different pieces of the puzzle here. As far as insurance rating, yes, the water system is at the best it can get to help with your insurance ratings. But when it comes to fighting fire, it's not there.
So what do you need to fight the fire? That's,
A full
We need
water
extra-
tower.
We need extra water that he's talking about, but
no, I mean, you have to, how much fire flow do you need to fight the fire?
it depends on how many houses we have involved at the time and the time we get the call. That's something I can't predict.
but 2,000 gallons per minute is the standard?
Well, you have to base it off the size of the house and everything to determine the fire flow that's needed for it.
Okay, so if you had a wish list, what would you set that number at?
I would say at least the amount he's talking about, the 2250, on the west end of the island where we have the bigger homes at. And the head pressure and stuff from the water tank all the way here to down there is not not sufficient amount of water.
Okay.
But in your description, I'm still trying to understand, you're describing fighting the fire and stepping on the hose. Doesn't sound like that's a pressure issue. That's a water supply issue. And I'm a little confused as to, other than when we're repairing a water tower, what are the advantages of keeping the tower below its capacity? I mean,
It's all a pressure issue because you have to, you go off the available pressure that's in the system. In the fire service, it's recommended you not go below what they call residual pressure, which is what pressure's left on the system. They recommend you not go below 20. That way you're not taking an area engaged issue that may be there, that you're not trying to pull, you're not pulling water back out of houses and stuff, classing hot water heaters or stuff when you're trying to pull all that water. And when you get it down to that point, when it gets down below 20, that's when you can start pushing that hose together with your foot, because you don't have the pressure there to keep it tight. And if you got, the further that way you get, the less pressure you have and the less available water you have. You can take a hydrant right out here off this tank right here. We got probably close 5,000 gallons per minute off these hydrants. It's not a problem. We can get 5,000 gallons of water out of them. But you get down there, you can't get but a little over 1,000 out of them.
So according to the report, though, it says at 878, there was 2251. So that should be adequate, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So we're talking beyond that at 1365. That's
And-
where we start to run into a problem.
And the other thing that you're looking at between Seagull and right here, you pretty much got a loop system, which helps the water can be pulled from two directions. Once you pass Seagull, it's all one way. Anytime you can loop the system, you're better off in it too,
Talk to me about like pumper trucks.
okay? We have, our two ladders are 2,000 gallon per minute trucks. The rest of our engines are 1250s.
So if we bought a pumper truck, would that take care of the issue?
No, we gotta have available water to be able to use that with the pump. The trucks only hold 1,000 gallons of water. The ladders hold 500 gallons of water. So, I mean, and even if you bought a tanker, let's say that had 3,000 gallons of water, and you hook it to the ladder truck, you got a minute and a half worth of water. If you flow it at full capacity.
Okay, why don't we move along here to fire flow?
that's what we've been talking.
Yeah, let's get
I
to the
know.
specific question.
What is actually required by NC fire law, NC insurance regulations? It says, note, the fire chief is authorized to reduce the fire flow requirements for isolated buildings or groups of buildings in rural areas or small communities where the development of full fire flow requirement is impractical.
I'm not aware of that.
That's in that same section where you're getting those numbers from out of
Yes,
Appendix
it
B
is.
for that required flow. It says that if you decide to go that route, I think the very first paragraph says that you have the ability to reduce the fire flow by half, by as much as half. It's in that same section where those numbers are coming from.
Yep.
I wouldn't be willing to do that.
Well, the question is, what's required by law? Is there any requirement? I mean, is there, say that you, okay.
Not by law, there's not no requirement other than what you would need for consumption. I mean, it's basically falls back to what level of fire rating insurance you want.
We've not adopted the NC fire code. What's the implication of this?
She's talking about the appendix,
Appendices.
which is where that number comes from, that 2250 with the calculations and the other stuff. But, yeah, there's some more stuff in that, but that's what she's talking about. Yeah. If you did adopt that, it could help in some fashion that if you adopt it the right way, then it could potentially require houses to have sprinklered systems, which would then reduce their load as far as trying to fight fires.
Yeah,
And-
sprinkler property is exempt from the fire flow requirements.
That's right,
It don't, but it's not, they don't count against us because it's sprinkler.
that's right.
Okay.
So it reduces, it, in that chart where you get to 2250 for a house up to 6,900 or something like, actually it's 39,900. In there, it starts reducing it if you've got it sprinkled.
Yeah, start reducing the amount that's required.
Those are big freaking houses.
Yeah.
Yeah, but he's also talking about three.
Now,
of
that
those
numbers,
guys.
those numbers right there, those are the old numbers. We have new numbers now. That's the old, out of the old fire code where they've got, that's the old fire code. But they're not off much, but they are different.
Okay.
Yeah. That's the one you had, isn't it, Vicky, the one that's in there?
I think so.
Yeah.
Tracy, we got the same one. It says the numbers provided are from the NC Fire Code for a house 6,200 to 7,700 square feet, type 5. How many houses do we have that are that large and would require that? And if the house is less than 3,600 square feet, we would only require 1,000 gallons per minute or 60,000 versus 270, which our current water tower can provide. How many homes in the extreme western tip of the island are over 3,600 square feet?
There's quite a few down there. But there's quite a few all over the island that are bigger than 3,600 square feet. Because whenever you consider, I don't know if he does, but in the fire code, when you have to do fire codes, when you have to consider what's under roof, which also means that, believe it or not, when you got piles standing in their walls, so the underneath is also considered square footage in that table. There's another thing here too, whenever you get into how that table was developed, that table goes to actually changes in that the multiplier starts changing for each floor. The actual number, that is for a single story house. That actual number changes quite a bit if you're using that for a multi-story building. And when I mean building, I'm talking about residential dwelling, it's only by stories out of that section. So you would basically multiply it times 2. The number goes down to 800, I think, and then you multiply it times 2. But anyway, it starts tripling that number. It starts doubling that number. That number won't be 2250. It'll be
homes.
way up there. It'll be up there like the 3,000
It doesn't say.
because it's
Where do you
in
see that?
stories.
Where do you see that?
That's what he said.
That table is
Single.
based off of if it's sitting right on the ground. So whenever you start doing that, you can look at it and you can say, okay, the whole thing's 6,000 square feet, upstairs, downstairs. And he can use that number. But the actual tabulation that was used to get to that was based off of a formula for firehouse, because I went back to DOI and got it, which shows you how they calculated that. And it literally, of course, this thing talks about gauging water needs, but when it says when you use a multi-story floor, then the way it works is that you literally take the 60, you take the house, its dimensions, and then you multiply it times a figure. And you multiply it by 1. If it's 1 story, you multiply it by 2, but it's a reduced figure. But instead of it being 2250, it's going to be 3,000 for a 2-story. So if we start using that calculation, you're not gonna be even where, in other words, if you use that number, then nothing down there is going to meet the requirements in that appendix. I forgot, I
Except
wanna
that
keep
each-
saying it's appendix B, but it's not, it's E or J or
But
something.
each floor then would be, say, if it was a 6,000,
Eight.
it'd be 2,000 feet on a floor, right? 2,000, 2,000, 2,000.
Right,
that
but
kind
they
of
don't,
deal.
because you don't fight it that way.
No, I
it-
know, I'm just
yeah.
saying, when you did the,
So
Yeah.
I guess I would like to know, where did that 2250 come from? How did you get that calculation that got in the report?
It came out of that. If y'all let me go get the book, I'll go get it.
No,
But
it came from,
It
came from-
came out of that table.
it
Oh.
comes out of that appendix
oh,
table.
I thought it said in the report, the fire chief recommends.
He recommended it based off of DOI's requirements.
Right,
And that-
I mean, we just asked the chief, like, what's the number
Mm.
that you have in your system? And, I went down there with one of his, assistant chiefs one day, and he was taking me through his GIS, he can pull up a house, and they have a table in there, or, data that's already supplied, because they calculated, it was already done, and we went through and looked at, a lot of different
He
hydrants
pulled
and
it off the tax
locations.
records is what he done. Pulled it off the tax records.
So it's a calculation that they've done, that they provided.
For each house, do you have that calculation? Is that what you're saying? You have that calculation for each house?
I think so. We don't have it for each house, but we take the bigger houses and we look at those and what we would be required off of them.
Okay, so that brings us to the next question. What do we change?
Could we change the building code to require larger houses over a certain square footage to install a sprinkler system so that the current water tower is adequate? Having a sprinkler system in the home reduces the required fire flow by half.
My answer for that was probably no, because there was a town, and I can't remember, somewhere up north, that tried to do that and they got sued. They said you got to require it for all or none.
That's right.
Could you discriminate against, because I want to build a bigger house?
Yeah, because then they won't be protected by the water flow, if they don't have the
But
sprinkler.
The law turned around and told them they couldn't do that. They took it to court and they got sued over it, and the judge ruled that they couldn't do that. You had to require it for all the houses or none of the houses.
And sprinkler systems are very expensive.
They're not expensive, it's not on new construction.
Oh, okay.
Not the NFPR, the
Yeah.
residential 13. I
Okay.
think it's NFAD 13.
It's 13D.
13D, yeah. I don't think they're as expensive. We used to price them out all the time to try to get people to do them. We would literally
I
price them
think
out.
on average it's
opposite.
somewhere around $2 a square foot.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's less than an air conditioning
Isn't that
system.
something that the fire department would support, though?
Yes, ma'am, I strongly would support it.
I would support it as well. I mean, I would support it as well. The problem is that the North Carolina Fire Code exempts all residential. It's exempted, right out of the first chapter
We don't go by
exempts
the
it.
North Carolina
But
Fire
it's
Code
something,
anyway, do we?
it's something that y'all can put a request in to be put in the code for Holden Beach.
Yeah, you could. I talked to the guy at DOI. He's fairly new. I used to know the other gentleman that was there doing really well. The new guy's new, so I don't know if I'm helping train him or if I'm getting as much information as I want or what, but he's a pretty smart guy so far. But he gave some indication that they were looking into trying to assist towns with some of this stuff. So they're trying to figure it out. And I've heard some rumblings at DOI too about trying to, it's causes the big house stuff as well. Yeah.
There's a big push all over the nation to try to get, because most fatalities are in residential property. So there's a big push trying to get residential sprinklers put in place. And the building code, on the building side, they're fighting it, saying that it costs a lot of money because they don't want to deal with it.
But
But
what,
it's actually made into part of the water system for your residential house. In the 13D, it's made part of the system, so the water is not stagnated, it don't sit there.
I got
It's
you.
actually being moved,
yeah,
because it's part of the water that you use in your toilet, your sinks, everything is part of the same system, it just has a different piping for part of the system.
Gotcha.
that's right.
I've never had to put one in a house, so.
Yeah, they're
It's only been commercial stuff.
they're not that intrusive, and it's not even the same materials anymore. They allow you to use other materials. But people don't realize about sprinklers is that sprinklers aren't there to put the fire out. They're there to create
Keep it in
a
check.
long, so that the occupants can get out.
Yes.
They're not there to put the fire out. They just want to make it so the occupant has a lot of time to get out. Because you usually die when you can't get out. I mean, so, and that's what they're in all buildings for. They're not there to stop a fire or put it out. They're there just to give you more time to get out.
Yeah. Kind of keep it in check, give you ample time to get out of the place that you're in. That's what they're mostly designed for. But most of them do, in fact,
Mm-hmm.
trip off and control the fire. So you know, and the other fallacy about it is every sprinkler head don't go off. They're designed so they have either a little glass bulb in them, or they have a piece of metal that melts out, and that one sprinkler goes off. And most residential houses, they come up with these detectors, you can even hide them, so you don't even
Yeah.
know they're there.
Yeah.
I don't know about that, but close.
Yeah, I mean, they make them where the average
I know.
person, they really have to
They've
look
got the
to know that they're
plates,
there.
flat plates and all that
They
stuff.
make them, they recess them. and-
They got some now that they recess and they actually pop down, but they'll recess. They look like a plug, look like a bottom chair plug stuck in the ceiling. Same nose.
Okay, so the Tri-Beach Fire Department would like 27,000 gallons, which is 2250 gallons per minute for 2 hours. Do your calculations assume all water for fire flow is from a tank and none is from a water line? Our current water tower's been empty the past 2 winters for maintenance, and yet we fought structure fires.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, in our, report, yes, we were looking at, providing the storage and the fire flow, assumptions.
Assuming that no water was coming across the waterway on either tank,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So in other words, there's a crisis somewhere.
Yeah, and, you know, not, I guess not directly, but, you know, also in consideration that, you know, in the summertime, the county can barely fill up your tank because there's so much consumption in the system, you know, just on the island, you know, some of those days in the summer, you use 1 million gallons, and that's just on your island, you know, so the county can barely fill your tank up. You know, at nighttime when demand goes down a little bit, I think it increases that value, so, you know, so if you kind of think about those things, you know, you like to have the county system there as a backup, but you also don't wanna consider that's gonna, you know, be your only solution too, or, you know, so somewhere in there, you know, I think the chief would agree, you know, you wanna have a fail-safe, you know, cause the county does have interruptions, you know, so if the county has an interruption and they can't operate or be limited on flow for 8 hours, you know, how much flow have you got in your tank over 8 hours? If it's in the summertime, you run out in 8 hours. So, you know, there's, you know, those are, you know, I'd say uncommon situations, but they're there and they happen, you know, so, that's, something in talking with, John Nichols and Jerry Pierce about is, you know, there's levels, you know, that they try and maintain, but in the summertime when there's so much peak demand going out, not just to your system, but a lot of systems, you know, because, you know, their pressure, and I know they work with Chris on, you know, the pressure, like you're talking about, it's a pressure and a flow problem. It's not, they're not one or the other, because they can increase the level in the tank or decrease it based on the operational pressure that the county's sending you. So that number or that height in the tower goes up and down. So like you said, in the winter, you know, they're working on the tank or doing whatever those things, and part of it becomes a water quality issue too. You know, you don't use much water in the winter, so, you know, if water sits in a tank too long and doesn't go out, it gets stagnant. Well,
Right.
then you're into, you know, controlling your water quality too. And I know Chief said they try and help them, you know, do more fire flow flushing and things like that, you know, to keep that capacity and the turnover going over in the tank.
Okay, please explain how NFF was calculated. I think we've kind of covered that, is that correct?
We beat that
It
horse.
basically came out off the chart, correct? It wasn't actually calculated by hand? Yes?
Yeah, it's the appendix that Tim
Yeah.
refers to in the fire code.
Yeah, they've moved it, it's been moved, that's why I can't give, if it was last year, I could tell you what number it is. This year they've moved, it's J, I think, it's appendix J. Last year it was appendix B.
And the end of that question was the pressure in the county system, and, you know, we've talked about that some too. They do control to what they can, you know, the pressure, but there's not an unlimited amount of pressure and flow either. They can, I guess what happens if you look at the overall system is Shallotte has a tower that's on, you know, this sub-basin, so there's an elevation that's in that tower, there's an elevation in this tower, and all that is related. You know, like I said, the overflow elevation in this tower puts it at about 70 PSI, so I think like 65 PSI is probably like a normal zone pressure that you're operating on the island, somewhere in
Okay.
there. And some of that is controlled by the county, but it's also controlled by the elevated storage too.
The report that was provided to DWR indicates there are no pressure problems. That's Chris's report. Is that an error?
Excuse me?
Is that an error, or?
No, I think the report that you provided to the state is a report of your usage and your metered connections. And I believe the state has a minimum fire flow requirement, which y'all meet. I mean, in this, like I said before, the state's storage and fire flow are the basic minimum that they require, which I think is maybe around 500 gallons per minute at 20 residual pressure, which is, y'all got that covered. That's not,
Okay.
you know, that's not a problem, you know, but One of the things that is in the report that I think we'll talk about here a little further down is, population and those types of things. In your report that's provided to the state, you have 3,050 metered connections, and that's what's provided to the state. And then the state just looks at your overall flow for the year and what's your average.
Okay, it just says, has the water pressure been inadequate in any part of the system since last update? And the answer is no.
I don't think so.
Okay, so that's all,
Not that I know of.
okay. What portion of the reduced pressure at 1365 OBW is due to frictional resistance in the pipe?
Which question is it?
I flipped the page.
Oh, that there. Some, all, maybe, you know, some of it is obviously frictional losses, because you see, you know, you have a tower here, well, it's 16,000 feet to the end. So you lose a lot of friction if you're trying to pull 2,000 gallons to that end of the island. There's frictional losses that happen, you know, over that length. But you also have a feed on the other end that's coming from the county. So it's frictional losses of the pipe itself, but it's also, you know, how much can be delivered from the county and how much is available in the tower. So it's, yeah.
Okay,
Some and all, I mean, it's not just one issue. There's frictional losses, obviously, because it's the length of pipe and the pipe diameter dictates how much friction.
well, and you have adequate pressure at 878 or whatever that number
Right,
is.
yeah. And it's a function of how far it is from this tower. Where is 878? It's, what's the intersecting street? Swordfish.
Yeah, it's about Swordfish. Yes.
Is that what it is?
It's about
Doesn't
Swordfish.
say report. It
Yeah.
doesn't.
I know.
And then is it pressure controlled by the county? And I think you said, yes, it was controlled by the county.
Yeah, yes, it's not all totally, I mean, they work with the town as to what level they're maintaining in the tower. So it's not, I mean, the county doesn't dictate exactly what pressure is gonna be, but they work with, I mean, in the winter, you know, when you take the level down a little bit, that's collaborative effort, you know.
Okay,
But you are fed by the county, yeah. Well, 12-inch on this end, 8-inch on the other end.
okay. Moving on to future demand, if no one had any more questions about fire flow. Fire flow, we're good? Future demand, where was the number of customers being 3,000 derived from? It's page 3, item 2, population and demographics. Our 2018 land use plan stats show 2,491 housing units in 2016. So even if you're rounding up to 2,500, would seem a more reasonable number to use. According to the tax records, there are 2,482 properties with dwellings in 2017. That was a combined question, guys.
Yes, the water supply plan that y'all provide to the state has 3,050 metered customers. So that's where that number starts at, is 3,000, and it's metered, you know, it's not just individual houses.
Some homeowners, this is the next one, have 2 meters, one for irrigation, which is not billed for sewer service. However, this is still only one home. As of 2017, local water supply report that the town submitted to the state shows 2,412 residents. Shouldn't this number be used? Also note that 0.475 million gallons per day is the peak sewer discharge, indicating that more than half, than 0.620 million gallons per day is used for irrigation.
We're looking at metered connections and total usage. You know, obviously irrigation gets used somewhere, and because there's a discrepancy in that number of houses
Right.
versus number of meters. So, you know, but it really all comes down to consumption. It's, you know, you have a master meter on this end of the island, you have a master meter on that end of the island, and you know exactly how much you use on an annual basis. You know, so the 3,000 number, and I think this kind of segues into the next one too. is starting at 3,000 metered customers. You know, we looked at, you know, the past 7 years and how much growth have you had in the last 7 years, you know, and in the county. I mean, you know, Jerry, you helped me develop a lot of these numbers is, you look at the past 7 years, which have had some upticks, some downticks, but 7 years is a pretty good growth number. I understand the island is finite, you know, there's only so many lots you can build on, but the 7 years past, you know, is a reasonable idea for where you grow in the future, and you want to make growth available in the future, you don't want to restrict it. So that's where our projections come in, you know, to go out 25 years is kind of a normal planning distance to look at, you know, your projected flow out at that point. So we're looking at metered connections, not buildable lots, and, you know, from a planning standpoint, you know, I don't ever want to be short-sighted on planning. You know, and some years from now, you know, I would expect, you know, there may be people coming and building bigger houses than are here right now, and your consumption will probably go up. You know, I don't think growth is gonna stop on tops of beach, and I don't think usage is gonna go down unless you start implementing, you know, restrictive use of water and, you know, get rid of irrigation meters. You know, you can start controlling the amount of usage that you go on those routes, but I think that's not a progressive view. I like to think that planning, you're probably gonna keep growing. I mean,
Well, you should probably be
people come
aware
to Holden
that
Beach, it's a great
we're-
place.
we're in the process right now of redoing our land use plan. And the last section that we studied was the demographics and the growth and the carrying capacity of the island. So that's what we are all it's all very fresh in our minds.
No, I'm sure.
Exactly.
Sure, yeah, I don't know, I mean, y'all talking about, you know, not allowing multifamily units in the future, or, I mean, at some point, do you come, Greg, and, you know, you start building quadplexes instead of single 2-bedroom houses? You know, in the future, do those things start happening because it's a great destination to come to?
I think the key discrepancy is a customer from the perspective of this report and apparently what is required for the submission to the state. If you have 2 meters at a residence, there are 2 customers present. So,
That's correct.
That's the discrepancy, I think.
so I think, you know, that's,
That explains it.
Yeah.
Next one down, explain how the average day for a year average, or figures, page 4 of the report were calculated. The calculated percent changes below are confusing. For example, customers grow by 4.97% from 2018 to 2020, but water usage grows by 13%.
Yeah, and that's a function of, it's not, we looked at it 2 different ways, and it's not just a linear number. The average gallon per day per year goes up a little differently than just the total customers. I think when we get out a little further, we might have gone to like 140 gallons instead of 150 or one or the other, but, you know, I think the short takeaway is when you get out there, it's projections, and, you know, we're projecting, you know, and there's not a big difference between 552 and 540 when you get out there, you know, into 25 years into the future. But you know, there's, you know, that projection is, like I said, I don't want to be short-sighted, and, you know, what could happen is, you know, what if we go into 10 years of drought and everybody wants an irrigation meter? So now you've doubled your irrigation meters, and, you know, you increased your flow probably another 40%. So it's hard to, I mean, I don't want to say one way or the other, you know, which numbers are exact and right, because you don't know what's going to happen in the future. And like the chief said, he doesn't know what's going to catch on fire.
And
next
this is Woody's questions. I think he was just trying to understand where these
Where they
numbers,
come from,
because
yeah.
they don't make a lot of sense, so.
Yeah, and I understand that. It's, that's,
He also noted that there seems to be a typo in that table too.
But yeah.
And then the question is, are we building a second tank for emergency hurricane issues? What if the irrigation and rentals were not allowed until the water supply was secure? For example, we had this with Matthew, that the water supply was not available because the Northwest Water, do you remember that? And we banned irrigation, and I don't believe we had rentals in that period until we had a secure water supply.
Yeah. Was there a damage to a main or something?
There was a damage to a main up there somewhere. Yeah,
Line broke.
yeah,
Raw water line.
yeah, yeah,
This way.
that's right.
Oh, yeah.
They couldn't get water,
Yeah.
couldn't get any.
Yeah, it wasn't coming from the county.
And is this need based on a system to cover peak holiday weekends with no flow from the county and a fire at 1365? Is that kind of where which kind of sounds like what we're talking about, right? Worst case scenario, we've got a fire down at the west end, we don't have the pressure, it's peak demand, we can't get the water from the county. Is that what I'm hearing? We're dependent on the water that's in a tank.
Yeah, however, I mean, it's not full peak problem. You know, if you looked at July 4th and the town uses 1 million gallons that day and there's a fire, I mean, that's the worst case, and we're not there. But, you know, we're projecting that, you know, you're getting more available storage, but not, I mean, we're not at the worst case scenario, so I wouldn't say that, but,
We're trying to be somewhere in the middle.
in the middle somewhere is, you know, what we've looked at.
Okay. Next question was, how is the projected total customers of the next 20 years determined? Page 4. It seems extremely aggressive if we assume an average of 60 homes. Actual was 61 in 2016, 58 in 2017, but only 23 in 15. We would have 2,730 customers, not 3,149 in 2020. And 30 customers, not 339 in 2025. So that's just a case of you making sure you had the,
Well, that's, I think, back to metered connections, not
Yes.
houses.
Yeah, he went.
Most of these questions are just really getting back to that same.
So, and, you know, and I understand, you know, what that question is about, you know, but we're looking at meters, not, you know, buildable lots, really.
okay, yeah, the next one is, the number for 2030, which is 3,649 customers, or 2036, which is 3,949 customers, are even more confusing since we only have 3,483 lots on the island, and some of them cannot be built on. Tim Evans can confirm this number.
Yeah,
Did
it's
you
good,
confirm that
it's
number?
good, I confirm it.
How could we have 3,649 customers or 3,949 if we only have 3,483 lots on the island?
The answer is the meters.
That's the meter.
The water meters. Note that
So how many lots did you say you could, total get to?
3,483.
Right.
But that includes unbuildable lots, the
Oh,
lots
yeah.
that are 10-foot strips, the lots that are 25-foot wide that have to be combined. Like, for
Yeah.
example, Mark, you live on 3 lots, right? Yeah, there's one house on 3 25-foot lots.
Yeah, he did a
Yeah.
recombination.
Yeah, gotcha.
That kind of thing.
Is
So
that
you
in
don't-
that statistic that way, though? Like our whole neighborhood is broken up?
All those numbers came off of those original subdivision. I mean, like, we've got a couple that are out in the marsh, you know, we just gave some refunds on some of them last year, where we were charging people and the whole lots are out in the marsh. Yeah, yeah. it's just-
So that number is definitely inflated.
it's-
Mark, that whole subdivision that
Yeah.
you're in, that I'm in, is all 25-foot lots, so,
Yeah,
you know, nobody can build on a 25-foot lot.
yes, you can. You can.
Okay.
Shotgun shack.
Gee, you can build on non-conforming lots as long as you meet the setback requirements.
15-foot wide
So
house.
it'll be like this way.
Yeah.
You'll be,
Oh, like one
you walk
room.
down the hallway this way. Yes, you can build on.
It's
So
5
total
foot-
build out would be
15 foot
less than
wide.
3,483 properties is the net.
I think it's somewhere around there. Yep.
Correct, and like
The
I
townhouse is
said,
only
that's
15
the
feet
difference
wide.
between meter connections and lots.
Okay.
Well, now, I'm gonna help you out, Shane. There's some lots that can have multi-family dwellings on them. that you have to consider. So that number may be in lots, but it doesn't, he may be right depending upon other lots that we don't consider being capable of taking on a whole lot of structures, say, for instance, the pier.
Yeah.
In other words, you could put a lot of houses or a lot of units at the pier. So, which would jump that number way up, right? Because each one of them would be, yeah.
I mean, that's 7 lots there right now,
In
so.
other words, yeah, it's gonna be hard to,
At some point, we will get to near saturation.
yes, you will.
Yeah, and I guess,
But it won't be.
when
in your
that
lifetime
happens
or mine.
I guess
Well, I
it's
think
though the
that was-
pace, as long as the continuing pace over the next 5 years is construction's not stopping, right? So we're still growing.
And we've maintained a pretty even keel, even through the harshest times. This island seems to build houses, or rotate houses. See, that's another thing too. When she gives you that number of 50-some, there is a great portion of those lots that houses were taken off of and built back. We got the same thing going on right now.
Yeah.
We did have that number one time, but it's a lot more than you think. In other words, in a year's time, we may build 40 houses, and 12 of those may be houses that have been taken down and houses built back in the same spot.
Yeah, and probably consume double the amount of water that,
I'll give you that. It's most likely, every time it's what we call a shotgun house, and it goes from being 900 to 1,200 square foot to, 3,000 range. So,
I guess the only relevance I'm trying to attach to this is if we do elect to proceed with building, adding another water tower, what capacity of that tower should we consider? Is it, is it going to accommodate our immediate need or the long-term need? And that's maybe where this information becomes more.
You're gonna need to take
More
another,
relevant.
you're gonna need to take another avenue or direction to try to calculate that number, I think. For clarification, I done it backwards. I was right the first time. It is Appendix B.
Okay,
Okay, but I also need, I think it's important that I say this so we don't leave here with a misunderstanding. Appendix B only applies to commercial construction. It does not apply to residential, single-family, or two-family dwellings, which means it would fall in, it would be applied to an R3 or any other commercial standard that you have.
and all the land down on the west end.
R3
is-
being like condominiums.
But all the land down on the west end is zoned for either 1 or 2 bedrooms.
All
two-
those
two
residential, there's no
residential.
commercial down there.
Right. And it's not R3. It's, we don't even have that classification, but it's designed for
Well,
duplex.
when I say, you gotta remember, we have it in our thing, but it's a mix-up, you don't need to think about it. When I say R3, that's a commercial designation. Residential, single-family residential dwelling
Right.
is a single-family residential dwelling. R3 in the North Carolina Building Code is a commercial residential structure.
So is there one for residential, a table?
There is no table, because the fire code exempts all residential structures. The fire code cannot be applied to a residential, single-family residential structure.
Or duplex.
Or, well, no, it's according to how you build this thing. Duplex is not a building term, I don't even understand it. That is a real estate or an architectural term that people throw out there, but the building code, we do not allow it, we don't allow the use of it, because that's just a term, it's like condominium, that don't exist either.
So what do you call it, a two-family home?
It's a single-family dwelling or a multifamily dwelling. Yeah. Yeah, but the building codes have a designation, so.
So this 2250 doesn't even apply to us?
No.
Well, and if you look at the chart, you'd understand. The chart tells you that type 5 construction for R3. So you can have type 4, you can have type 2, type 1.
Well,
So
I-
as you see, that goes down because those are different types of construction. There's different types of structure. Some of them are almost fireproof.
Concrete.
So type 5 construction means that they're building a commercial building out of wood. So you gotta have more water to put it out.
So it's
Type
most
4
equivalent.
construction means both mixed wood and concrete, or heavy timbers, which means you need less fire to put it out. And so if you read your table that you've got, then you'll understand, I just gave you one of my classes, but it backs you up. But nowhere in there does a residential structure fall under that table. It doesn't fall in there.
Just kind of use it as a reference point.
Right, it's a reference, and type 5 is the best reference you're gonna get for a wooden structure,
It's the worst construction you could have to try to put out a fire,
which is what we build.
which is what everybody builds, but it doesn't apply. I don't know how to tell you that. Because if you were building, I'll tell you what, if you were building a commercial structure with type 5 construction, okay, I'm gonna give a full class here. And it's an R3 structure, which means people are gonna be living in it. Then it's going to be built with wider egresses so they can get out. It's most likely gonna be required under certain circumstances to have sprinkler systems based on how far they gotta go and how far the corridors are, because they can be attached. It's going to not be allowed to have certain materials in it, flame spread, smoke capabilities of them are gonna be totally more stricter than a residential house. So even though you're saying it's the same, it's nowhere near the same. It is a big different monster that people can live in. I mean, it could be as far as, well, there's some of them down here, you gotta have fire extinguishers outside the door. You don't have to have one on your house. You follow what I'm saying? To get down, it's a whole new ball game. And it's outside the realm of what typically everybody knows and sees.
Think of like an apartment building.
An apartment building. And for instance, an apartment building may have everything from a different type door, you know what I mean, to different type fixtures, to different, everything about it is gonna make it safer for the people to be in there because you got more people in that same envelope. And type 5 construction requires better protection.
Which is what we would require if the pier were to become populated with very dense.
Which is what the building code would require, all of that. The North Carolina laws would
So
require.
having said all that, how do we determine how much fire flow we need then if there's no reference table that we can use?
Well, according to the firehouse thing, the best way you find out is ask your chief. I mean, seriously, that's the way they do it, is you go to your fire chief and he tells you, I mean, because he's the guy that's protecting you.
The Department of Insurance has a page that we use, that we calculated all our commercial buildings and stuff off. You can use the same thing for residential, and that's kind of what we did for the 8,000 square foot house down there. Is we took the square footage, the size of it and everything, and put it in that sheet, and I didn't bring one with me, but I can get it to you if you want it, the sheet they used, and you can plug it in. If it's multiple stories, it tells you how much more to add and all this stuff, and it comes out with the needed fire flow for that building.
So what is that, do you know off the
I
top of
don't
your
know
head?
off the top of my head. I can get it to you, though.
I'd just be curious, but I also don't think that we should build a $2 million water tower for one house that's outrageously large down there in the West
I
End.
agree.
Just to add to the confusion, you have a table, but you can also go back and you can actually find the formula, how the table is calculated. You know, and it's this enormous formula, you know, NFF figure equals, factor of C, factor of O, 1, parentheses, 1 plus X plus P, and you go through and you, like C is defined as 18F times the square root of A. So you go back and you define all these things based on whether it's ground level, whether it is frame construction, what kind of combustibility it has. I mean, it tells you residential.
How close the next building is to it?
Yes.
All that stuff is figured in?
Yes, communicable party walls.
Tells
Is
you,
that part of what you, when you did your calculation, show he knows all that, and he did it for all those houses down there? Every house has one of those.
I don't do it for every house, we take.
the biggest one, I would say.
Worst case scenario, and
Okay.
makes it, kind of figure from there.
Well, I mean, when I did it, I got for, if they're 21 to 30 foot apart,
Is that the one they use?
then it was 750 gallons per minute. If it's 11,000 to 20, or 11 feet to 20 feet, it was 10,000 gallons per minute. If-
But it
so-
depends on how big they are, right?
Yeah.
So what was those
I don't know,
calculations
I'd have to
for
go
house
back
size?
and look. I think I did 5,000 square feet.
Hey,
5,000.
did you mean to do 1350 some and not 1365? Because the big house down there is in the 50s, the 65 is the last house on the
Right,
left.
just the very last house.
Yeah, but that's not the biggest house down there.
I
No,
think
it
that's
isn't.
where the hydrant is.
That's
Oh,
what I
okay,
understand.
okay.
That's the
We
last,
took- we took
that's the
one
last
off the
hydrant on
That's
the
right, there's one
island?
before that, and then there's one after that. That's right.
So that's the last hydrant on the island that you got the 1,000?
Yeah.
Worst case.
And if you look at the hydrants, they're color coded. Blue gives you 1,500 gallons a minute or more. The green is 1,000 to 1,500.
Yeah,
The orange is anywhere from 500 to 1,000. And if it's red, that's less than 500.
So like Lockwood Folly they don't have nearly the pressure we do, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
And it goes back to, like he was talking about, I figured in the friction loss and the borderline size in there, it's all 6 inch in there. One of the main lines, I think is 8 going in there, but all the side streets are 6. So you get down to available water that comes through the line.
They're all red
There's
Over-
some of them that are red.
in Lockwood Folly?
Well, sorry, I'm asking a question. Because I'm not sure, Chief, but I'm asking this because this may affect more than just the big house at the end. You know, if you look at what fire flow requirements are, I mean, aren't there some side streets that aren't even on the main that are down there that have a 2-inch pipe that don't even have a fire hydrant? I mean, how do you assist that position?
Well, the side streets are all 6 inches, as far as I know, all the side streets are. So if we have a fire on the side streets, most time, and that's why we got beat up so bad when we had the house fires down by the fire station, we pulled the hoses off the Boone Boulevard. We caught 2 hydrants off the boulevard, not on the side street, because of the available water that you can get out of those hydrants on the side street. You know, you tap off a 12-inch line or you tap off a 6-inch line, which one you wanna go to? So, I mean, we had to keep the road blocked, and as you know, once you get past High Point Street, one way in, one way out. So if we blocking the road, you're stuck. And, so if it's and especially like the long streets like, Greensboro Street and High Point that do loop all the way around, because they're dead end streets, they hurt us as well. Because there's no loop there.
But a new water tower wouldn't help that situation, right?
It would help it some because you're increasing the pressure, the head pressure that would be on the system, and you got a closer available water supply. So it's gonna help it some. It's just like he's saying, you don't know how much, because you don't know how much friction loss is gonna be in the line. It depends on where it's located at, to how much it would help. There's a lot of variables in figuring how much it will help. But yes, it will help. It's not on how much. I don't have that expertise.
You can estimate
You
that.
can estimate it.
But, what my point is, there potentially could be, smaller side streets that we haven't even really touched on as far as the report's concerned. That I'm sure the chief probably could point out, several places, you're gonna increase, that flow and capability by having an additional tower, yes, and if you wanted to, get into a further evaluation of, more sites and see what, that implication is, that would be
Okay, why don't we move on real quick to citing questions, because I know you've got to go too. Was an off-island location considered, and would this allow for lower land acquisition costs and impact the view shed less?
Not off-site or off-island, no. What we considered in the report were, initially it was town-owned properties, so there were no land costs. But we also put in one that is not town-owned. That one, I just picked to look like an available spot on Seagull. But that would, require land acquisition, and I think that number's in there.
It's gonna require a house up there now.
Well, yeah, they started building stuff through there, so we were only looking at, properties that the town already owned, one being that little stretch along Ocean Boulevard, and then one being, off the disposal island, off of the end of, Heron Landing. I think there's further down the discussion of the pump station that's further down the west end, but the town only owns the station itself. The rest of the property is owned by the homeowners association, so the town doesn't own that. Could that be a potential site? Maybe. If working through the HOA, that might be a possibility, but right now the town only owns, what is it, like 50 by 50 maybe. So no off-site.
Okay.
The
When
other
you,
thing, if you do go back off-site, you got to take in accountability, that you still got an 8-inch line that's coming across the waterway down
Is it 8 or is it 10? Just kidding.
there.
Just
You did catch
kidding,
it, though.
just
You did
kidding.
Yeah. It could be a 10, I don't know. I was told
Well,
10.
is the
You told
county,
8. I don't know.
is the county recommend we have a new water tower?
Well, I don't know if I can answer for the county.
Well, I was wanting you to say yes, because I was gonna try to figure out why I don't have one, where I don't even have a fire hydrant, and I have a house.
I think that, they would be, fully supportive of Holden Beach having a tower. But I don't think, from a county's perspective, having a tower on the island or on the mainland really isn't a benefit to the county as far as them potentially contributing.
Yeah,
From a financial standpoint, there's no benefit to them really, because they're satisfied with their water flow on the mainland on that side, so, I don't think there wouldn't be a big incentive for them to participate in the project, if that's.
well, I'm gonna ask this question on behalf of the citizens of Holden Beach, because if I was a citizen, I would ask this question. If they're the purators of water, they provide the water to us. And we buy the water from them, but they're providing the water. If we needed a new water tower, why would they not provide it? I mean, it would be, because the people of Holden Beach pay taxes in the county at the same rate as I do, and if they needed a water tower on the other side of the waterway over there, the county would be putting it up. I mean, I'm thinking that if I lived here, where I live, don't have no water, I don't have a water, anything. I provide my own water and my own septic system, but what I'm saying is that, which makes me hot enough, but if I lived at Holden Beach and I'm paying town taxes, I understand I'm entitled to town services that I normally wouldn't have, but at the same time, I'm paying taxes at the same rate they are over there. The town's actually buying the water, which means that every person in the town's also a customer over there. You know what I mean? If they're
You pay
willing
for
to put
the-
a water tower over there, why would they put it over here?
The water's paid for out of a totally separate fund though, isn't it? I mean, and the water tower that would be financed would come out of the
Yeah, but
water and sewer fund.
that's not what I'm saying. What I'm
He's saying,
saying,
why isn't the county buying the water tower for us?
why wouldn't they put the water tower up?
Well, but, Tim, I see where you're going,
Mhm.
but
Which is a good,
it's not a tax-based issue, it's a water and sewer service fund issue. So, and it's different places in different parts of the county. I think they have service areas, and I don't think everybody pays the same rate.
I pay the same tax rate they pay over here.
No, your water rate, not taxes.
I don't have any water. I don't even have a water line. I pay the same tax rate. See, that's what I'm saying.
Well, I get you, I see where you're going with that,
But they do the same thing here.
But from a water, if you got water service, your water rate is dependent on, for Holden Beach.
Does
your water
does the
rate-
county supplement any of the county water and sewer?
That's a good question.
Does any supplement come from the county into that fund? Because
Right, I don't know. if-
that would be the, and if the answer is none, then his
Right,
argument has no
Yeah.
basis really.
yeah, I get you,
But
but I think.
it's a good question, we should definitely ask the question.
Yeah, I mean, and I think, that's, an approach to, Mr. Nichols or, someone else over at the county.
Caption.
Or maybe even the finance director, I don't know, but, I think I lost my train of thought. The county has minimum requirements that they meet on the mainland, so I think they're satisfied with their water
Which is-
supply.
Which has,
So if you need more water here on the island based on what your individual requirements are, that's because of what your individual requirements are on the island.
That's
So
right.
that's where the difference is as far as them.
that's what I'm saying.
They're
But you
happy
said,
with
that-
where it is over there.
but you said the county helped you come to those numbers, but the county doesn't think I need any water.
Right.
no,
Okay,
and the county didn't mandate that we had a sewer system here either. I
That's
mean,
right, that's
We
right.
elected to that,
But
so
they
we
didn't-
joined.
Yeah, but I think the biggest thing is that it's a potable water supply and not a put out the fire water supply. What it does is it's here and it's available, and you try to get it to match
Yeah.
what you want.
okay, when you did this, was sea level rise considered when you were looking at siting?
No.
Have any subsurface geotechnical studies or reports been done for the different proposed sites, and how would poor soil conditions affect the cost of the tank?
No, and I think this goes to, where I started was, think our perspective of this is what you have in your hands is the draft preliminary engineering report, is really the preliminary engineering report to a full-blown preliminary engineering report that would go to a funding agency. So at this point, I didn't think it was prudent to do any geotechnical investigations. There was no environmental assessments done that would have to be done if you go, start searching for funding. So no, that hadn't been approached.
Okay,
But, and this, I think there's another question about it. You want me to wait for that question?
no,
Because the two sites that are, there's one on Ocean Boulevard, and it's right off the road, and the Seagull site's right off the road, low-lying, likely poor soil conditions. So there's, in our cost estimate, there's like, I forgot what I called it, it was additional foundation requirements.
non-standard foundation.
Non-standard. So you would expect that it's gonna be more substantial foundation required there. The other one, off of Hare Landing, off the disposal island, there's a natural area that's elevated above the marshland there that's probably has better soil conditions.
There's a site out there that has an X zone.
Yeah,
I've
so
actually
it's
been on
totally
it.
out of the flood zone over there, so I guess maybe it is above the sea level
It is,
rise.
it is.
But obviously it's, would require getting a pipe over there.
Yeah,
But that soil condition would probably be assumed to be a little better than the two on, right by the marsh.
how much land is needed for the tower? How much land are we looking at?
Estimated, probably a half acre. You might could get a little less than that.
I mean, you had it on Seagull, and that's a 50-foot wide lot by 55 by, or 50 by 100 or something, so.
That's
Yeah,
it.
so it's,
Yeah, that's a good example right there.
yeah, I mean, your little site here is, what's that,
It's
like?
pretty tiny.
Yeah,
That's
I
not
don't know if it's a
much.
quarter.
Yeah, I was gonna say, that's not a half acre, I would say.
Yeah.
It's not even covering half of the site that's small out there.
Then we talked about what the difference between a non-standard foundation and alternatives 1 and 3, and a standard foundation and 2, just beefed up.
Yeah, yeah.
And then how are these possible sites selected? Site 1 on OBW is in a conservation area and does not conform to our adopted CAMA land use plan. Site 2, Heron Landing would require a pipe crossing a tidal creek and appears to be sited in an area that floods during high tides, yet cost estimates call for a standard foundation. And Site 3, Seagull, is in an established residential area. Was the decrease in property values considered? Well, I'm guessing that Site 3 is now gone since there's a house going up
There's
on it.
houses there. There's other properties in that area that potentially could still be available. It's, at a planning level,
Well, from a planning level, that really bothers me.
yeah, I get it,
Putting
yeah.
it in the middle of the
Putting it
street.
in the middle of a residential area, to me, is wrong.
Yeah, well, that's why we're.
An
talking about
industrial
it.
use in an established residential area.
Yeah, yeah, so,
So,
that is, you're right, from that perspective, I see that. So, that site, is not ideal.
Yeah.
And the OBW site, I wasn't aware of a conservation area being in there. I guess that's a CAMA conservation area. Would that restrict the tower, or,
it doesn't conform to our land use plan.
okay.
And it'll be in a conservation district, and I don't think that we are allowing hardly anything in a conservation district.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, we were looking at sites that the town already owned, so that popped up. And then obviously the other one is Heron Landing, which you would have to directional drill under the tidal
Yeah.
creek to get over to that point. So, like I said, if that pump station site is, from a usage standpoint, from our perspective, but the town doesn't own that, so we didn't consider it then. But I'd be happy to, put that on the list, or any other sites that we come up with. This is, it's a process, and it's evolutionary, and sites are, that sometimes is the hardest thing, is coming up with a site.
Yeah,
The Heron Landing one, that's, that one's away, it's up on, by the disposal area, and the
Right.
town owns it.
It seems like the further west you could get would be
Better.
the better, and that site's
Yeah.
already kind of yucky. So,
Yeah, further west is better.
Mm-hmm.
I agree.
Okay, moving on to costs. Will the life cycle cost analysis be conducted for the different style tanks to gauge long-term capital costs as well as operation and maintenance costs for each tank option?
Yes, that, would come in the next phase if you go to, a funding source. They're all gonna require you to do a life cycle cost, net present worth, puts the value back to today's to look at, the options. The funding agencies are different, this kinda goes down to the next one, but, rural development has a different preliminary engineering report format than infrastructure finance does. So that's kind of where we are here, is if you decide to go forward with a project, we would have to formulate it and reformat it to which agency you go to,
Okay.
because they're different. And rural development operates on a 40-year loan cycle, infrastructure finance does a 20-year cycle, and they have different requirements, and it's just a little different. The life cycle cost, we would look at that and in that process, it's, there's lots of numbers that go in there, but that wasn't.
That'd be next phase.
Yeah.
Okay. The next question is, engineering fees seem to be higher than the normal USDA-RD curve for a typical tank project. What issues involved in this potential project cause this increase?
Yeah, that wasn't forethought. I think it was a number on a spreadsheet, and that's not, I think that's a placeholder for engineering and planning, surveying, environmental, those things are all, plugged in there. When you get to a point of having a project or even the next phase, rural development, like, the question, points out, is they do engineering fees on a curve, and they won't pay over the curve.
Sure.
Engineers sometimes go over the curve, and the towns are expected to pay the difference. But that just, it kind of depends on, the severity of the project, how difficult it is. But rural development does have, that type of curve. I don't think infrastructure finance does, but, they expect it to be within reasonable norms.
Okay. Engineering fees seem to show limited time allocated for inspection. Why is there so much more time on project administration and not more time for on-site inspection?
And that's something that can be tailored at that phase. To do on-site residential inspection, if the town would elect to do that, that would increase that inspection amount. That's not in there. That's periodic inspections that an engineer would take on, during. And the administrative part is really just administering the construction contract. On-site inspection, continuous is, that would be a different number and a different consideration if the town want to do that. If
Okay.
you want to plant Tim down there every day, some towns do that, and they don't want to have constant inspection.
Should we consider having an alternate for a used tank when this project is bid?
That's a consideration. I'm not sure if funding agencies would go that route. They may not want to fund on a note on, a used piece of equipment. I'm not sure about that, but I think that's probably where they would go. And on a, your tower here is 40 years old, and it's in pretty good shape. It's probably going to last longer. It's a long-term investment. I probably would not lean to buying a used piece of equipment, but it's a consideration that, I think the town might look at.
Okay, general questions. Can you give us, references for your last 3 elevated storage tank projects? You could forward that, you don't have to spit them out.
Thank you.
And how did you work with the owners on previous projects in relation to deciding size and type of elevated storage tank to best suit their long-term needs?
And this goes back to, Jerry Pierce is working with us on this, who, obviously was the director of utilities of Brunswick County. So, we're leaning on a lot of perspective from his point of view on that. We worked with, other communities on preliminary engineering reports. We did one last year for Sandy Field on a $6 million sewer system and help, them. They haven't pulled the trigger on that, and that
Well-
happens, from time to time, but,
What about in relation to a elevated storage?
well, and that's on our side is right angle.
Yeah,
I can't go back and say that I've done, a water tower for somebody last year, way
Okay.
back. We used to do some work up at Pope Air Force Base and some of the government contracts, I think we had some in there. Water tanks aren't that commonplace, they don't come around that often.
okay.
And, that's part of where, we felt like Jerry's perspective would help a lot in that.
You referenced composite tank and spherical tank. Why would we not consider fluted column or multi-column tank? Our existing tank is a multi-column type. Why not consider this style of tank?
That's still a possibility. There's not many of those that get built anymore like that, because especially out here on the beach, it's just more surface to paint and maintain. The composite and spherical tanks reduce that, that amount of maintenance, that comes along with a tank. More steel is more steel to corrode out here on the island, so that one wasn't high on the list. If you wanted to, plug that in and see where it comes out, we'd be happy to, throw that in as an alternative.
What is the cost differential and the pros and cons of each tank type over the life of the tank? I think you just kind of explained that.
Same thing, the composite gets you, probably a better full life cycle cost, because there's less, surface area to maintain. And it comes, and this is part of the decision process is, it's more upfront cost, it's gonna be a longer term loan amount, but, with the composite tank, you have less, maintenance on painting and, keeping up the material. But, that's a consideration to look at on the next phase, I think.
What are your thoughts on conducting an analysis with a hydraulic model to study how the proposed and existing tank would operate during normal and peak flow scenarios? Would this service be provided?
Right now, hydraulic modeling wasn't in, our scope. I think that, the model for Brunswick County is vast, it's huge. Their model has probably a whole service area
Sure.
in one model. The island, of course, is smaller than that. We could look at, modeling that tank, but if you go and start tying into Brunswick County, that's gonna get a lot more involved from a modeling process. I think McKim Creed did like all of their model for that section of the county. I'd probably lean to them if you decided to do some more modeling. They have a lot of experience on the county side, so if you're looking to do a lot of modeling and pulling off, what all's going on the island, that may be, where to go.
Okay. Do you feel comfortable you would be able to meet the project timeframe, design milestones, permitting, and bidding milestones?
Yes, from the point when you get there, it's, there's a process to get to the point of, funding and bidding and construction. But once you get there, it gets a little more solid. This phase is a little more, a little harder to pin down, I guess, on scheduling timeframe.
What other alternatives were considered, such as an extra pump, ground level tank, change in water line diameter?
Well, we've
Kind of
talked about that a good bit. Talked a second about ground storage. Ground storage is, a possibility. It takes up more space on the ground because the tank can't be big and elevated. It's got to be, take up more footprint. And then you get into pumps, which, take your life cycle costs out there to where it's probably, may not be as cost effective in the long term. And, you got to do generators, they got to be elevated, so one of those things is, that's one that we really didn't put on the list as an option.
Wouldn't you need a generator for a backup generator? How do you pump that water up to a tower?
Well, that's coming from the county's feed,
So they have enough pressure to get it up to the tank?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So
But
you
you
don't have like
wouldn't
a pump on the site. It's all coming from the pressure that the county develops. That raises the level in the tank when they're, it's kind of like if you're on the island and you're
Oh,
not using as much water as they can pump, it fills the tank up. If you're using more than they can pump, it's coming
Sure.
down, and that's
The
where.
pump is into the distribution system?
Yeah,
Okay,
well, yeah, from the county.
okay. I mean, if we had a ground level tank, then that would need a pump to
Yeah.
put it into the distribution system.
Correct.
Okay. We already talked about what assumptions were made, such as no flow from the county on either line. That was the assumption made, correct? Is the water system to cover peak flows on holiday weekends with the assumption that there is a fire on the west end? Yes, pretty much. What planning period are you expecting for this tank project? 20 years seems a little short. Shouldn't the timeline probably be around the 50-year range?
In flow projections, I think it's normal to look at about 25 years. The tank's gonna last. Your tank's at 40, it's in good shape. From a life cycle cost or, salvage value, yeah, you look out 50 years. And I think when we get into that, financial evaluation, that, normally on elevated tank, you look at 40-year life cycle cost and the salvage at 40 years. So yeah, it does get pushed out on that level. But looking at flow, we look at a little closer number, 25
Okay.
years.
And then the final one, should emergency storage be considered when sizing the proposed elevated storage tank?
Well, I'm
This
not
is
sure what-
emergency storage, right?
Yeah, it is, yeah, that's what it is, it's providing, that emergency storage. 'Cause, we've talked about this, you're getting a lot of water direct from the county's main, that is a buffer, so it is emergency storage. I don't think you need to go and do emergency storage, 2 level.
Okay. Okay, that is every question that was on the list. Does anybody else have other questions that they would like to ask?
One other thing, I don't know if I touched on, and just the financial part, when you're looking at, I was talking about rural development.
Yes.
And infrastructure finance. Infrastructure finance looks at like a 20-year, and a couple of years ago, they were given 0 interest loans. They've gone up now to like 2.5%, but over 20 years, whereas rural development looks at 40 years, and their rate right now is about 3.25. But when you look at, you're going out 40 years on a loan payment, I think I had it at like $1 million, close to $2 million. The difference is, you get a total payment with rural development, and there is a decreasing payment, but it starts out at about $108,000, whereas infrastructure finance, if you go to them, starts at about $140,000, because it's a 20-year loan, shorter
Yeah.
cycle, so you're paying a little bit more.
So it would qualify for either one of them?
You would qualify, yeah. Loan, I think Holden Beach probably is never gonna qualify for any grant money, or they call it like loan forgiveness, or, something like that. But, it's all based on median household income, so normally Holden Beach doesn't qualify for much like that. But I'll plug, David and Christie, they have found some money in places that may not normally turn up. I know they funded, this dredge project, so, they're, I'll keep them plugging away, they might find something, you never know, but, normally it's, from the funding agency that's based on your median household income.
Okay. Did you guys have anything else you wanted to make sure we understood, or?
Yeah, I'm not sure we have much more clarity onto the, I guess, when you talk about, though, the earlier comment, and I can just imagine the 4th of July when we have all these illegal fireworks being shot off, and it happens to be a little bit windy night, and I guess, the safety net of having that, just that extra level of comfort, and the additional fact that if we ever did, like the disaster, we have a little bit more time to recover in the sense if we lose county. And it sounds like our neighbors are following tracks and are ahead of us, and so, I don't know, just from that standpoint, I'm inclined to sort of support moving forward, but it's inevitable that we're probably gonna need it sometime, whether it's, and now we're talking about, this is a couple of years out when we'll finally get the effect of this, because anytime we do this, we're making a decision that's not gonna be available tomorrow, it's gonna be available 2 years from now, so. I know, this to me falls into the same kind of, almost like when we've elected to push forward and elevate the sewer system, which is actually probably gonna cost a lot more money than this,
How's that come along? They're in construction now, aren't they?
of one,
Of one.
and we'll need 2 more ultimately, I assume, so.
Well,
Just turns out.
I don't think we're in any position right now to make a recommendation. I think we need to all go back and sleep on this.
I don't even
And
think we
revisit it.
have enough people, right? We don't have a quorum anyway.
We have 4.
Oh, we don't have a quorum. Yeah.
To build it.
So
It's a don't be.
if it's good with you guys, I would
Yeah.
say that we just need to,
Do you understand what I
thank
just
you
said?
guys for coming and,
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Well, I commend you
Oak
for
Island is much
further
more
investigating
populous.
and studying. It's good to dig in.
well, we feel like we're doing the due diligence that was asked of us. So, that's why, I mean, a lot of these questions were very pointed, but we feel an obligation to do that, so.
Hey, I'm just across the bridge, so if you come up with some more questions about the fire side of it,
Okay,
Tim and Ron, either one can get over there.
okay. Okay,
Thank you.
so then, are you guys good to move on then to item number 6, discussion and possible action on cargo elevators?
Yep, before I leave,
Yep,
can we go on that quick?
yep.
I read Tim's memo, and I think it more than answered what we asked him.
Right.
All we
Yeah.
really wanted is, and I think he went out of the way to really reach far beyond, and actually, I think that could serve as I would move that we would suggest forwarding that letter on behalf of us, and I at least am in concurrence. I don't know if we need to have a discussion about it, but
I agree.
I agree with Dave.
I figured you guys would all think that, so I went ahead and wrote a memo. At the July meeting of the Board of Commissioners, the Planning and Zoning Board was directed to consider amending the town's Code of Ordinances, section 157.060, to allow the building inspector to handle requests related to cargo lifts via the permitting process. After research by town staff and discussion, the P&Z voted to recommend leaving the ordinance as it is written. The Planning and Zoning Board feels that the setbacks should be protected and exceptions should only be made in cases of hardship where there are no other alternatives. This is the role of Board of Adjustment, and we feel they should continue to make these decisions on a case-by-case basis. By continuing this practice, a precedent will not be set allowing encroachment into the setbacks as each case is decided on an individual basis. According to the building inspector's records, only 4 cargo lifts have gone to Board of Adjustment in the past 9 years, or 5% of all permits for cargo lifts. We do not feel this is overly burdensome for Board of Adjustment. In addition, the proposed change does not conform to the adopted Campbell Land Use Plan, our comprehensive plan. Does that make sense? And then include as an attachment Tim's email?
yeah, there you gotta put a footnote down that you plagiarized a good portion of it.
I reworded it, it needed a little wordsmithing.
You gotta have a reference.
That's fine.
So we want to make a motion
Somebody
to
needs to make a
submit that,
motion.
make a motion to submit that to the board?
I'll second.
Okay, motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Okay, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries unanimously. Okay, so I will submit this and Tim's memo, and that will be the end of cargo elevators that we've been looking at since July. Woo! Okay, moving on along. Citizens Advisory Committee on Parking. Pete?
Okay, so we had a meeting, and we were told to investigate 3 things. Investigate potential vacant land that the town does not own, which can support additional parking, and then develop a list of, and that was if determined to be necessary, which seems to be the key here, and then develop a list of town-owned properties that could potentially provide additional visitor parking if deemed to be necessary. So what we, as the committee, we had a motion on the floor. We looked at some photos that were taken during the holiday, Memorial Day and July 4th, and the motion read, "It is not necessary to establish additional public or private parking at this time. Continued monitoring the effects of new signage and map identifying existing parking and provide additional awareness of present parking and increase enforcement." So we kind of we felt like that the parking's adequate. As far as the paid parking goes, we still, we really don't have a lot of land for paid parking. When you take out all the right-of-way parking and all the other, I think really much Jordan Boulevard and the few places we have at the access points, there would be less, or right around 200 spaces. And Tim was gonna find out if we did need to have some free parking, how much that might be, and subtract that off of there, and to see how many public parking places that we can have, or spaces were available for paid parking. It would be a place to start, looking at a paid parking thing. So, that's pretty much where we're at.
And then the Jordan Boulevard.
Oh, yeah, we
We're gonna
did,
show them
we did find a,
you went and got that. but-
we
We're gonna
found,
show it too, but except for if
the,
you haven't seen it, but we've seen it.
Show Mark. Mark was involved
Mark.
in this last round.
Da, 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 da.
right, and that was, one of the taskers for mid-year was to, have a third party investigate the possibility of organizing Jordan Boulevard.
Now, where was this?
I followed up on that, by the way. The third party they were referring to when they could not, they didn't think we could find the drawing. So since we found the drawing, you don't have to do the third.
Okay.
Okay, we're not gonna do any more voting, right?
I will send, no, and I will send you the announcements. I'll email them to you.
No, actually, no, let's put it down on the list then.
So that's basically our report was to
Okay.
really kind of,
Thank you, Pete.
Was just a point, there was a fifth member that was questionable whether she could attend, did it work out for
yeah, we
you to
worked
get meeting
it out,
time?
Marty, and we met at 4 o'clock. She was there.
Yep.
Was
She
there
lives on
a
the
public
east end.
meeting notice of this? How did I miss that? I did.
Yep, there was, and she came, and
Okay, maybe
thank you for the report, Pete. Did you have something else?
do you have a next
No, that's
meeting? A rough
Well,
mi-
we were trying to decide if we needed to meet again. If we're not gonna do if the additional parking and all that is not something that we feel is necessary, are we sure? And did we want to extend the life of the committee to investigate parking during the next season? Something like that,
You're gonna have to address the paid parking though, because it was they asked us again to investigate it, and, they're asking us
Yeah, I
to do
mean,
that. That was
The
last.
prior
time.
committee recommended, and I think planning and zoning said that it didn't seem to be a practical and a need.
But they've identified
But
that
it sounds
now
like
as
this
a-
is sounding like they want it to be a revenue generator for
Right.
the town.
And
so-
Curie Beach did a similar thing. They have limited parking, and I reached out to the mayor, and he sent me an email saying that, they had 3 parking lots. They weren't on the beachfront, but Curie Beach is not that big, and that they didn't have it was not a, profitable scenario for them, and they felt like they would need to have significant additional spaces in order for it to be a profit center for them.
I talked to the planners at Wrightsville Beach, who said they only do their paid parking, and they have their whole thing, it's laid out online, but they don't have that many paid parking places, but theirs is only seasonal. It is only seasonal, and it's certain dates to certain dates. And that gets really, I talked to David about that a little bit, they use an app, which is, there is no key fob, it's an app, and you literally, it says if the app's not working, you have to call the police. You have to call the police to make sure they don't tow you and get permission to park or pay or whatever. Now, I wouldn't go near that with a 25,000-foot pole. I mean, I read the whole thing, but I talked to the planners over there. Yeah, it's not apparently it generates a lot of money, but it is not the world's greatest thing, I don't think.
Yeah, I mean, they were saying it's a third of their town's revenue.
Yeah, but they also have IT people that monitor and work their apps and keep that's what I'm trying to tell you,
Yeah, I
is
hear you.
that it's not as simple as just throwing up a key fob, because they do parking in the right-of-way areas, and they use an app to have that parking paid for. It's not a fob, it's an app. You go on your phone and get the app, and then you pay.
Where are you getting the fob thing?
There's, they told me that as well. They have the key fob thing where
Okay.
you like if you're, like you purchase a key fob
Okay,
and then you pay. So you can, like they have people that come, I guess they're beach goers, so they go every weekend. And so they pay for a seasonal fob to get
Okay.
into those paid parking areas. Yeah, like we get in the door here with.
sure.
Or like they get in up there at the clubhouse up here on the side of the road.
You
Okay,
gentlemen
well-
don't need to be sitting through this
I
part of
think
this.
if you sit there all
If you just
night,
want,
Do we-
We
need
have
another
another,
meeting?
we have another meeting.
we,
Okay.
I mean, we
An
just,
hour.
just for your interest, I mean, we just completed and issued a full parking report. I presented it at the January meeting to the commissioners and addressed,
Is that just January?
Yes, it was just yesterday.
Yeah. Here we go.
Yeah, I kept reading David's thing going, I don't think I'm doing enough here. I need to do
The
more.
the little houses are back on. Somebody's brought that back up. It's on the night's agenda.
Little houses.
The little houses,
oh, the big,
Tiny houses?
tiny houses, yeah. Believe it or not, everybody else is having problems with tiny houses. It's actually tiny
Tiny
houses.
well, that's your,
I've already said it. You go back and look at the minutes 2 years ago. State of North Carolina's having a problem with tiny houses. We're worried about big houses.
So do you wanna make send me a directive at all?
I
For
will,
another meeting?
I can do that, but you're gonna have to meet again, cause we're gonna have to address this paid parking thing.
Okay.
Cause what Bob said in the meeting was, he was just kinda reiterating what was said last time, but I do have to say that the technology has changed. And like what Oak Island is looking at is where they scan your license plate. So,
you
Oak
take
Island
your,
has- and I want you to think about this. Oak Island has 100 and some employees, and they got about 5 or 6 IT people, and we don't have that here. It's just, it might be just a.
I'm just trying to make sure that we do what's on our tasker. And,
I understand. What I'm saying is that I'm throwing the information out that I happen to know that I have, and, because I did a little research on it myself, and
Yeah.
I'm assuming that I should do that.
My suggestion would be to just say, well, yeah, paid parking sounds fine, I think you guys should issue an RFP. Because, I mean, us calling to parking vendors is not really, I don't think it's appropriate.
I'm gonna have to say that I agree with Vicki. I think it's time to just bring it to a head and just say, the question of paid parking comes down to what you wanna do
Right.
and what it's gonna take to do it, and put it out for a request for proposal. Write up a bid package and put it out there.
I mean, that's how I would address this tasker, is just to say, well, yeah, and do an RFP. We get the thing back and they're gonna say you don't have enough parking spaces, or you don't wanna charge enough, or we
well,
find out
for
we're
one
only gonna
thing,
make
my guess
$1,000
is after our discussions with them last time, they did it for Oak Island, they've done it, they've come back with this big elaborate study. They don't charge for it. And he says, I think, my guess is they're probably gonna say, hey, we're gonna need 10 grand or something to issue you this report, because we can't continue to give these away for free. Because it isn't just an issue of that, it gets into a confrontation of, now we're no longer, historically an open,
Yeah, but didn't we do that the first time?
We did not ask for an RFP, no.
No, we didn't ask for an RFP, but we did, what was his name?
we reached out and they discussed,
Yeah, they said, we told them how many we had, and they said that they didn't think we had enough to make it worth their while. And that was the company that did Sunsets, and they only have 115. That's, yeah, I
Well,
looked at it.
don't you kinda think maybe that is because?
but
we're just
Sunsets
a-
is a private, it's privately, it's not town run, it's run by the pier. And so and it's all in one spot, so it's,
Well, but what I'm saying is that, yeah, that's right, it's all in one spot, it's a big parking lot, and it's private, which means that they gated it and they can monitor it. We have,
Well,
how
no,
hard
I-
it's gonna be for them to put a gate up here for 20 parking places? And then another one for 12 and another one for 9?
Well, what they're saying is it wouldn't be a gate, it's either gonna be, if you go and
Is that
park
what
in
we
some
wanna say?
places, you know,
What
you
you
have your
said?
parking, like I parked in
That's what I would recommend.
Charlotte the other day, and I
Rather
went to a
than
meter, and I
scrap the
said, I'm
meeting,
in
because that, what we do.
Well, I
76
think you
to
guys
say,
need
I
to
put in
vote.
$2
Yeah, you need to
and
vote.
I had an hour.
All right.
You need a vote to do that.
Oh, and there was some more misconceptions too about Riceville Beach. That number that was thrown out there wasn't even close. Somebody said it was like $25 an hour. It was you. Said it
I
was
read that somewhere. Like,
No,
when I
it's
was
only,
looking through all this
it's
stuff.
only like $12 an hour for all day, and, you know what I mean, it was $17.50 all day and $12 for 2 hours, something like that.
Well, I just felt like it isn't really appropriate for Citizens Advisory Committee to be trying to talk to vendors, really, that should be a town function, and that the staff should talk to vendors and do an RFP.
Well, there needs to be a bid proposal written up first.
You know what I'm saying?
You gotta
It
give
seems
somebody,
like
you gotta tell somebody what you want, and then you can let them put out a request for proposals.
But you first gotta decide whether you really wanna viably consider it, rather than keep punting it down to us to say, we recommend we put in, because it really confronts, it's more than just a revenue issue, a cost issue, it gets into an image issue of the beach.
Yeah.
We're really confronting, and it's really more of a board of commissioners discussion topic.
Well, that's why I think that the answer to
And
that
that's why we sort
part
of
of the
punted it back
tasker
in their
is,
face and.
Okay.
the answer to
I'll
that
do
part of the
that.
tasker is to say, if you guys think that it's worthwhile, then just say, this is our recommendation. You bring that back to planning and zoning, and we throw it on up the line. And, I mean, it's time to put up or shut up in my mind, and ask for an RFP or don't. You know?
We're tired of chasing ghosts.
Okay, so, moving on, is that all, Pete?
Yep.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Comments, next meeting is January 22nd at 2:00 PM. It's review chapter 3 of the land use plan. P and Z business will follow the land use plan, and the BOC agenda I saw had things on it. And I wish everyone a Merry Christmas, and I would entertain a motion.